First of all, my name is Aric Snee, and I'm a member of the hot glass demonstration team here at the museum, and also a practicing artist on my own. And so some of the work you're going to see here is more indicative of the pieces that I make for myself outside of the museum. Helping me out tonight, I've got the A team. If I could come up with a dream team, this would be it right here. We've got the best team in the world assisting me here tonight. And starting off with George Kennard at the second bench. Let's give George a big round of applause. George is going to be helping out with all the color application. And Ryan Doolittle here as well. Let's have a big hand for Ryan Doolittle. And last but not least, Chris Rochelle. Let's hear it for Chris. And oftentimes when we do demonstrations on a daily basis, we get asked the question, how long would it take you to make a piece like this if you were in a factory? And hopefully tonight we'll be able to kind of demonstrate that. So instead of making one piece over the course of an hour, we're going to make 3 pieces. And we're going to do that by utilizing this incredible facility that we have here, where we have 2 benches, 2 workstations. And George is going to be starting the pieces on this side of the stage, and then we'll be finishing the pieces on this side of the stage. When we're finishing one, we'll start the next one on the other side. So it's going to be fast-paced, it's going to be dynamic. I've also got some images that I'm going to share with you as well. And actually, would you mind starting up the little presentation? I'm just going to start up with a little background information about myself and how I got to Corning, New York. So after art school and after working for some private artists, I decided it would be important for me to spend a dedicated amount of time in a factory doing a traditional factory apprenticeship. And those are pretty hard to find, especially here in the States. But I did find the first one at Simon Pierce Glass, which is in Vermont. And I spent a year at Simon Pierce working with artists from Sweden and Czech Republic and Russia, and really gained an understanding of the factory system from Europe, and it led to an investigation of other factories that were here in the United States. And so I spent a year at Steuben. This is the factory, at Simon Pierce. This is Simon Pierce in Vermont, and they do quite a large volume of production wear annually. I wanted to further that sort of education in my mind, and so I came here. So here we are. This is the factory. This is the building we're sitting in today. So this building housed the Steuben glass factory for I think about 60 years. I think that's about right. And this is before it was remodeled. So the space was remodeled after the Steuben factory closed here in 2011. So you can see the roof line has been altered quite a bit. And if you look to the left-hand side of the screen, where the ductwork comes out and those large rectangular boxes are situated, that's what we call the bag house. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Steuben glass and the fact that we used lead crystal, clear, colorless lead crystal. And so that bag house was in place to filter the air as it left the factory. So because we were using lead, we had to do some really stringent environmental protection systems. So I came here originally in 2005 specifically to work for the Steuben glass factory. And for me, it was kind of like a second bachelor's degree. It was that kind of traditional apprenticeship where I was able to get all of that hands-on experience that you can't necessarily get in a 4-year art degree because you're taking all the other classes. So it's really up to the individual to find what that next step is going to be. So for me, it was really great to be able to come here and work in this factory. This is a great image that I found. This is probably back in the 60s, and this is exactly where we're sitting. This is the old factory. This is the same footprint that we're sitting in. And if you look at the railing where the gentlemen are observing the Steuben glass workers, that would be positioned right about here, and it would have run lengthwise this way. And the visitors to the Corning Glass Center at that time would have come into this space, and they'd be able to view the Steuben factory workers doing production on the floor. And that was wonderful for the visitors. The only trouble was that on the weekends, the glassmakers weren't making glass. And so that sort of led to the creation of the Hot Glass Show, which for a long time was positioned right up here on the balcony stage that still overlooked the Steuben glass blowing floor, as it was called. And Steve Gibbs here at the museum was instrumental in starting that first hot glass show so that people visiting the museum could still get the glassmaking experience even when the factory was closed. Here's another great shot of an anonymous glassmaker. I wish I knew his name, but you know, Steuben was really considered the last word in craftsmanship in the United States, and it was long given as gifts for heads of state internationally. And so a lot of these workers created some of the finest crystal the world has ever known. And I think it's just really important to realize that and realize that this space that we use today has been carrying on that tradition for a long, long time. And we're all really proud to be here and be part of that. This is on the factory floor. This is what a traditional Gloryhole Hut would look like. And I include this slide because if you look over on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that little A2 button, and that's a little flip lever. When you flip the lever down, the light comes on, and that corresponds to the gob station. So here in our studio here, we have a furnace that we gather the glass out of. But at Steuben, they had a different system. They actually filled the glass up from the bottom of the furnace. So it would drip into a cup, and the glass was measured based on weight over time. So if I were ready to make the next piece, I would flip that light on, and Butch would be downstairs, and he would see my light come on, and he would put me in line to get the next cylinder of glass that would come up through the floor. There was an elevator that brought it up through the floor, and that elevator was right about here. So you'd turn your light on, you'd come over, you'd get your gob of glass, and then you would start to shape and manipulate it. This is one of my gaffers, Steve Bertrand, and this gentleman right here. That's Chris Rochelle, working with Steve Bertrand. And, you know, Steve Bertrand was one of the great gaffers, and it was during my time here at Steuben that I really learned what a gaffer is. And, you know, during our shows here at the museum, we think of the gaffer as the person making the piece from the beginning to the end. But in the factory situation, the gaffer was the leader of the team. And so they were responsible not only for the finished product, but also for teaching the rest of their team. So it was a leadership role, kind of like the chef in the kitchen. You know, you had to make sure that all of your staff were aware of the temperature and the timing, and also a keen sense of quality, and really being at the leading edge of quality. At the end of the day, they were responsible for the final product. Here are some of the pieces that we would make on a regular basis: the eagle on the ball and the trout and fly. Those were some of our favorite jobs to make because they really capitalized on the properties of the material. Here's another one of our gaffers, Keith Walushka, and we called him Wally, and Wally, another great gaffer. A lot of these gaffers to this day are some of the most skilled glassmakers that I've ever been around. And I think it's important to note that in the broader context of the glass world, they didn't really know how much respect that they were given from other glass artists outside of the factory environment. And so I think it's just really important to kind of give these guys the credit that they really deserve. Here's the gang. So this was on Roby's last day of work, and we were trying to hoist him up into the air. Roby had started his career over at Main Plant, and so he had spent something like 40 years inside of a glass factory. So we were all really happy for him when he was able to get out and retire. And Roby still actually blows glass over at the studio, which is our educational facility. So this idea of apprenticeship, you know, I want to just talk a little bit about this idea of apprenticeship because it's something that becomes harder and harder to find, especially here in the US. You know, there's a lot of factories that are closing, and there's nothing really to replace that apprenticeship in my mind, which not only is about gaining skill, but it's an important part of culture where a person's allowed to progress from adolescence into adulthood. You know, that sort of structure is kind of becoming a lost commodity here in the States. And to sort of relate that to our glassmaking practice, I think a lot of young glass artists find themselves making really complicated Venetian goblets. And sometimes they are given a hard time because of that. But I think that, the students that become obsessed with goblet making, whether they know it or not, are trying to replace that apprenticeship. So by copying the master's work, they are giving themselves an apprenticeship of sorts. So while I was here at the factory, I was lucky enough to receive a residency at the studio, which if you haven't visited yet, I encourage you to do so. And after making clear crystal for about 3 years, I wanted to do something that was the exact opposite of that. And so my time spent at the studio was making these black and reflective vessels that had stainless steel inclusions in them. And the studio is just a really great resource. And being able to spend a month of having unfettered access to the resources at the studio really helped me transition from working in the factory to go back out into graduate school, which I did at Alfred University. So I think for now we'll just pause on the slides. We're going to get back to the action here on the hot shop floor, and we'll get back into some images pretty soon. So George over here, he's been working away. He's got 2 different colors on the inside of 2 clear gathers. And he's about to take the 3rd gather on top of this. So he's going to head to the melting furnace and take a dip. And in the meantime, Chris is starting another color application that will apply to the outside of the vessel once we get the clear glass gathered. So check this out. George is notorious for making big glass, and I told him not to gather too much glass for this. So it looks like he did hold back just a little bit. So we'll go ahead and block this up. And in the meantime, Chris has 2 chunks of concentrated glass color. And he's going to actually case that in clear glass, and then we'll apply it to the outside of the vessel. So before we get too far into it, I just want to give a shout out to our awesome AV team. We've got such an amazing facility here, and the AV team really captures all of that. We've got a staff upstairs in the booth, and they're going to be giving you all these great live action shots as we move through the process. So thank you guys, it's awesome. So what we'll do here is George is going to sort of shape this up, and then he's going to let it get fairly cold, because when we apply this wrap to the outside of the bubble, we don't want that bubble to be moving around too much. So he's going to kind of let it get a little bit set up. On the other hand, Chris is going to work to get that glass color as hot as he possibly can, because we need to wrap it around the bubble and then do some manipulation while it's still hot. And I didn't mention this, but if you have any questions as we're moving through the process, please don't hesitate to let me know. Always happy to answer questions as we go. So Chris is going to take that color, go into the furnace, and case it. And so that's important because these colors could bleed together on the surface of the vessel. So this is going to kind of keep everything intact and a little bit separated. So this body of work that we're creating today, this is a new series for me, and it's in stark contrast to the design forms that I've been focusing on for the last couple of years. And so it's been nice to kind of return to the properties of glass And we'll be exploiting the properties of the different colors through these pieces. We're really going to let the glass flow as it wants to. We're going to work with the different viscosities of the different colors and get a little wild with it. It should be fun here tonight. So Chris is going to get that color nice and hot, and we're going to apply this in a very traditional way called the Wacky Rap. And you'll see why here in just a second. I'm ready when you are, buddy. All right, so I want to touch this down towards the moil so I don't miss any spots. And we're just going to kind of have some fun here. Perfect. Thanks, Chris. Awesome. So there's the color application. So now we need to just drive that heat back into it, smooth it out. Those colors are going to flatten out quite a bit. Once we get them flattened out, we'll start to blow the vessel up pretty quickly here. Did you have a question up top? Yeah, go ahead. It's a great question. The question is about how much of the design is dictated by the artist and not on the material itself, right? How much control do you have? And we have a tremendous amount of control when we decide to. You know, we can make things to an 1/8 of an inch tolerance off of a blueprint, and that's really what we did here at the Steuben factory. So by making this decision tonight with these pieces, I'm making a decision to let go of some of that control, but I've set the color patterns up in such a way that I can predict how they're going to react. So in other words, we have 2 soft colors on the inside with a stiff color around the outside. So that structure that we just applied is almost going to act like a cage and help determine the final form. So it's almost like you're giving the glass a set of constraints and then sort of walking away from those constraints and letting the glass sort of dictate the feel. You'll see when we continue the slideshow, you'll see some of my other work, which is very different from that. And it's very precise and methodical, which is why this is so much fun to do, you know, to sort of balance that part of it out with giving up some of that control. Yeah, great question. Thanks for that. Any other questions as we kind of take this reheat here? I'm going to come over there. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. The difference between soft and stiff colors. So if we have a white glass like this right here, it takes a lot longer to heat up than a dark blue glass. So the darker colors absorb that heat faster and they stay hot longer. So this would be a stiff color and this blue would be a very soft color. So we know how this behaves and we know how this behaves. And we also know if you put these 2 colors side by side in the same piece, it's going to get a little crazy. And the blue side is going to heat up much faster than the white side. So, you know, I've made that decision to do that, knowing full well that I'm going to lose a little bit of that control over the form, but the result to me is pretty amazing. So, yeah, great question. Thanks for having me clarify that. So this is the great part about having a team. You know, I can sort of get the tools set up and get a little bit focused and have the team sort of do a lot of the heavy lifting and stuff. And, you know, being a gaffer here at the museum is a real pleasure because the team is so highly skilled and qualified. So here we go. We're going to use a wet newspaper here to shape this up. And yeah, blow please, Chris. And stop. And so we got some volume there. Everything still looks fairly uniform, but keep in mind there's still a pretty thick layer of clear on the outside. So I'm going to take this over to the marver. And we use the marver to chill the bottom, not just the bottom, we use it to chill the glass. And so we try to always maintain a little bit of extra thickness at the bottom of a piece so that it doesn't break out the bottom and become a flower pot, and it won't be top heavy. So you can see already while we're over here, George is starting up the next piece. Let's torch it and we'll do the jackline heat. Chris Rochelle here, who's been doing this for about 18 years. I know he looks like he must have started when he was like 4, right? But we've worked together for a long time. Got it? Yep, let's blow it up. Blow. Blow hard. Stop. Let's let it hang. Gotcha. So already the color on the outside is being a little difficult to get that constriction in there. We'll get it though. All right, let's blow again, please. Stop, that's good. All right. So we'll take it for a heat here, and this is where we're going to let gravity kind of do its job, and we'll see how the structure on the outside is going to affect our form. George, how you doing over there, buddy? Good? Okay, cool. I might need one more coming out. Okay, open please. Thank you. Just a light puff, please. Stop, that's good. So you can see really quickly what that color is doing. So we're going to just take a nice heat on the bottom, and we'll work on kind of flattening that out, and then we'll be ready for the punty transfer. A question? Using the torch, yeah. So when we make that constriction, the area that we have to heat is the last thing in the furnace and the first thing out. So that area is colder than the tip. So we use that to reverse that heat differential. Yep, good question. I'd like to say hello to my mom and dad watching at home. So Ryan was using that oxygen-assisted propane torch, actually natural gas torch, and the tip of that's probably like 4,000 degrees. So it's really good at melting the surface of things. So we superheated just the bottom. We're going to flatten the bottom now, and then we'll transfer it onto a punty rod. So Chris right now is making the punty. This will be the handle that will stick onto the bottom. And then we can flip it over and get access to that opening by the pipe. All right, open please. So you can see George has already got his second gather on top of the color. So as soon as this one is in the box, we're going to be ready to just pick up right where we left off. So we'll have a really good continuous movement here in the shop. So this puntee transfer, you never really take it for granted. I mean, you get used to doing it, but every piece is different, and the temperatures still have to be exactly correct. I think I'm good. I'll just give it a little torch. You just pull back just a touch. Perfect. Good? Okay. 2 drops. So what we'll do now is heat up that front half, and we'll smooth things out a little bit, and then we're going to use a tool called a soffietta to inflate the top just a little bit, just to give it more of a shoulder. And once we have that inflated, then once again, we'll kind of let gravity do its trick, and we'll see what those colors want to do at the top. So as I was talking about the gaffers that I had the chance to work with, there's a funny story. One of them was extremely talented and was so precise. We talked about that 1/8 of an inch differential all the way around the piece. He could get it to match the blueprint perfectly. He was so good. But he was really difficult to work with. He was really demanding, as a lot of the gaffers were, because they took a lot of pride in what they did, and so they were extremely demanding. And some were just kind of difficult. So the joke always was that management always wanted to clone this particular gaffer because they were so good at their jobs. But they were so difficult that they would never be able to work with themselves. All right, so Chris did a great job. He's got a nice heat in there. I'm just going to kind of control it a little bit. And then, yes, please, Ryan. And stop. That's great. Thank you. Okay, so we'll torch the punny, and then I'm going to take this last reheat. You want to suit up, Chris? This one, let's lay down on its side. Yep. One thing I didn't mention, the colors that we're using have a lot of metals on the surface, so I'm trying to reduce the inside to bring those metals out, so we'll get kind of a mirror shine on the inside of this. So it should just take a couple drops of water on the punty, and the piece will break free. That's going to pop right off of there. All right, so there's one. So each one of these vases, we're going to make two more. They're kind of a variation on the same theme. And the last one, I've never made before for real. I practiced it this morning. I thought of it in the shower when I was getting ready for work. So it's an opportunity for me to try it out with a full-scale team. So George has got that second piece started. Chris, if you wouldn't mind, after you grab a drink of water, start up that wrap, and we'll be on our way for the next piece. And I think I'll just resume the slides here if you guys want to kick that back on. Right, so we left off here. So I went to grad school at Alfred University, which is about an hour west of here. And I was really interested in this idea of sort of the demise of the American factory and trying to find ways that we could reinvent it through really clever design. So kind of moving away from maybe more decorative objects to things that had function. And for me, function can be that it holds water and it pours well, or function can mean that it's a mental driver. And it can ask questions and propose solutions that might seem crazy at the time, but might lead to other developments. So I started making this body of work. I also developed a system of water jet cutting window glass. So these became modular tiles that could stack by themselves to form architecture. And so the idea here is that, building facades have for a long, long time been constructed with a glass skin. And that facade has become dated really quickly. So this was an attempt to create a modular system where you'd actually be able to change the building's facade inside of a cavity by using these modular structures. And they became part of an installation that I did that was, again, kind of proposing these different solutions. After school, I decided to give myself my first real design constraint, and that was to create a phone amplifier. And the constraints were that it had to be all glass, it had to be one piece, no wires, and this was the first prototype that I made. So I made the prototype, I photographed it, and I put it on a website called Design Boom. I don't know if you're familiar with Design Boom. And I got really lucky because in Denmark, there's a design company called Holmegard, and they're a 200-year-old glass company. And the day after I posted this online, the creative director, Manus Jorgensen, at the time, saw it online and decided that this would be a good direction for their company to go in as they tried to propel themselves into the next 100 years and try and avoid falling into the trap that a lot of design companies fall into, where customers become more interested maybe in the glass on the screen of that phone than on tabletop objects that have been collected. So this is me prototyping the object in the hot shop at Ball State University. And it's interesting for me because when I work as a designer, I'm not providing the company with sketches because I know how to blow glass. I provide them with a finished prototype. And so that really streamlines the production process. So where typically you would find a drawing that gets rapid prototyped, I'm actually providing them with a finished prototype that then gets rapid prototyped. So for me, the hot shop has always been the rapid prototyper. This process is so fast and immediate that if you put a glassblower next to a MakerBot, the glassblower is going to win every time in terms of speed. And so because of that, we're able to fail really quickly. We can work through prototypes really fast. And the other benefit to that is that because I've actually made the object myself, all of that knowledge that I've learned during the process gets translated directly to the workers at the factory. And so it really streamlines the development process. This is the finished object. And I should say the speakers are produced in a factory in Turkey, and Holmegard does a great job of vetting the factories where they have work made in. And in my mind, a factory, it's kind of like analogous to the situation in the country that it's situated in. And we have to be really careful that we choose factories that have good conditions and are really fair to their workers. Here's the finished piece, a little video. All right, so I think George wants me to go back to work. So we're going to pause right there for a second, and we'll pick up the slides. He says he's going to gather again on that. George makes big glass. Couldn't do it without him. All right, so we're going to get back to the action. We'll pick up the slides here in just a second. George is going to give me a break here. So I love showing this because a lot of times when you go to a design shop or you're shopping for any object that you buy in your house, the tendency is to think that these ideas just kind of drop out of the sky. But in fact, they're on the back of an immense amount of failure. And these are all the failures, and so I love showing like how many iterations this thing went through before it worked. And I'm not a sound engineer, I don't have a physics degree, so I had to try them all and change it and just adapt really quickly. So this is Those objects that you see there, that's the product of probably about 4 months of working in the shop, every day to get this thing to work. They started out really weird, like caterpillars with trumpet faces, and slowly evolved into the freestanding design. So one of the things we deal with as designers is obsolescence. I'm sure all of us have objects that at one time were the state of the art, but they end up collecting dust. And when we have sort of this economy that dictates that we buy a new phone every year because it's the cool thing to have, part of the idea with the speaker was that we could challenge that by saying, we're going to marry your phone with something that has this other value to it. And maybe by doing that, we can prevent people from throwing away their old phone and getting, and not getting a new one. So regardless of that, we're still faced with this problem. So this project here was sort of a direct commentary on that. And so with the Apple iPhone speaker, you can shape your Apple to whatever device you have. So it fits any device. Well, what about the iPad or the iPhone 7 Plus? Use a banana. Find a fruit or vegetable that can accommodate your device, carve it out, spend a little time, and you'll never have to worry about finding the right adapter again. So I did a residency in Denmark last fall at the Royal College School of Design on the island of Bornholm. And that's a glass and ceramic school. And so I had some of the students, this is Will and Kwong. Will and Kwong, I hope you're watching. I had the students carve out an Apple for their specific device. So we had maybe 6 or 7 different phones with different speaker arrangements, but everyone was able to make it work. And we ended up with a symphony. And there you have it, the Apple iPhone speaker. So we're going to cut back to the action here. These guys are ready to put this wrap on, and we'll be right back at you. Thanks a lot. So Chris has taken a nice flash, and again, the AV team here is so awesome. They're going to give you this kind of awesome view of this thread wrap going on here. All right, so for this one, we've got on the inside, the colors are strawberry red and purple. So these are really going to be fighting the whole time. To make it even more difficult on ourselves, we've put a wrap of white, green, and red. And we're going to manipulate that color in an asymmetrical fashion. So kind of an experiment here to see what the results of that color application will give us. So here we go. Chris has got this nice and hot. And so we'll just kind of pause and flip. And we're just going to drag this through. And then we'll flip it, and we're going to do the opposite direction. And flip. Perfect. We'll leave it right there. Perfect. Thanks, Chris. I'll take it from you at the hole. We've got a question online. The question is, how much does the glass heat up when you're in the hole like this in the reheating furnace? Okay, open. And it kind of refers back to that color application. So those blues are going to heat up more than the white. And because we've got all of those colors happening in the same piece, you really just have to react. Because when you're in there, you'll see those different sections heat up and start to move before the others. So you really just have to keep on your toes and watch what's happening. But I don't really know an exact time. We all kind of develop these internal timers, you know. We just kind of, maybe 3 minutes. Let's go with 3 minutes. So I'm just kind of wiggled on that purple side because that's going to want to start to heat up a little faster. You mind taking another heat, Chris? Any other questions out here? Okay. The blowpipe itself, how much does the blowpipe weigh? We're using what's sometimes called the extra large workhorse. I call it the Ninja because it's effective. And I'd say the blowpipe itself weighs about 4 pounds. All right, blow please. And stop. Let it hang for a second. All right, Chris, let's torch it, and then we'll do the neckline heat. So for the third piece, George is starting up. In this piece, the color application is a little different. We're doing what's called an overlay. And I've asked George to do what we call a color fade. So we have a chunk of gold color, like a gold topaz, amber color. And he's going to blow through the color, so it's going to fade from a dark yellow to a very pale yellow. can already see that purple starting to really let go on one side. So I'm thinking it's probably going to be a more flattened vessel, which was within reason to expect. So we're going to go ahead and taper up the bottom here just a little bit. George on the other bench already has the overlay going. And he's going to start gathering over that. So that'll be the same amount of glass, but we're going to shape that in a much different way than what we've been doing. Let's cap the pipe. That's good. Can you turn? I'm going to torch the foot. So we are ready to punty once again. So that's what Chris is starting. He was just preheating that, so it's nice and warm. That way the glass sticks to it. And I think it's so cool working here because, you know, all of us, like I mentioned before, are all practicing artists in our own right. And all of us bring a lot of different styles and techniques to the table. Open, please. And for that reason, it's really inspiring to work here. You know, we're surrounded by really creative people, people like Ryan who use color in a way that's really courageous and, yeah, it's just really adventurous use of color. Things like that have really kind of impacted this work for me. You know, I've gone from really sort of modern forms that could only ever be one color, gray or blue, to you know, these pieces which are just full of 6 different colors. And a guy like Chris, who's really worked really hard for years to become really proficient at the Venetian style glass goblet making. And you know, people like George, who can make everything from a tiny teapot to the largest lighting fixture you've ever seen in your life. All right, open please. Ready when you are, buddy. All right. Yep. Two drops. All right, so there's 2 out of 3. So George has this third piece ready to go. While he blocks that up, I'm just going to flip back over to the slides here. Just have a few more images. I'll run through them pretty quick. Yeah, we stopped at the Apple speakers. This next project is a series of self-watering planters for that same company, Homegard, which is in Denmark. And so again, starting with the failures. And I'd like to show this slide because, in my experience, it's amazing how long you can convince yourself that a bad idea is a really good idea, And so I told myself that I had a good idea for about a year, and it turns out it wasn't a good idea at all. So we moved from left to right through the process, and if you see the blue base there, that was a model where you had a concrete ring that housed an underground or below the surface reservoir, and then you had a top thing with a wick, and then you had a dome on top of it. And I really thought it was pretty cool. But we came down to the deadline, and the creative director basically said, you need to go back and give it one last shot. And so I reframed the constraints for the project. And the way that I reframed the constraints was to say that this object has to be just as appropriate for someone's home kitchen, where they might use herbs, as it is for a commercial kitchen. And so that meant that you wouldn't want to lift off a dome. It has to be hygienic. You want to simplify it to its essential parts. And so there's a little close-up of the failure. So this was the final form. So it's basically an hourglass form. The water's in the bottom, the reservoir. A nylon wick brings it up to the top. So once I established the form, then the testing begins. And I tested this for about a year before it got to market. So these are all the different forms ready to be sandblasted. And, testing sizes as well. So this size was designed for someone like me who doesn't necessarily have a green thumb, but enjoys having fresh herbs in the kitchen, and I can pick up that little pack at the supermarket and bring it home. So I wanted to size the smallest one to fit that perfectly so that you wouldn't need any additional soil or any special tools to enjoy plants at home, and it fit. So that's the kind of testing that goes into it. So these are the final products. And you can see the smallest size really closely resembles that test piece in terms of having your fresh chives in the kitchen ready to go. And here's another shot of that finished product. It doesn't end with the product, though, so then you have to deal with things like packaging and instructions. And we can translate things into a couple of languages, but not all of them. So then you're forced to develop, a system of pictures so that anyone can understand how to use the thing. So we'll stop here. We're going to take some time here and finish this last piece, and then I'll wrap up the slides. Thanks for hanging out with us, everybody. We'll give it a little hang here. All right, blow please. And stop. Let's squeeze that in a little bit. You can see this would be impossible without a good team. I mean, when you see these really large-scale bodies of work, it doesn't mean that the gaffer has to be able to move this amount of glass. It's just, you've got to be able to put together the right team, and these guys are the best. So the reason I like this is because you can get those sharp lines. The only other way I know how to do it would be to use like a metal spatula that we call a tag. And I just wouldn't be able to get the leverage with this, and I feel like I would have to spot heat each line to get that crease. So this way I can just use the weight of the glass itself to just really get those aggressive markings in it. So yeah, just another way of trying to kind of subvert the really traditional, strict technique that I think we can all sort of get trapped in from time to time, and try something new. The trick is here to keep the whole thing hot enough that it doesn't break, but not overheat it so we just lose all that work we did. So if we stayed in the glory hole too long, all that texture would disappear. So we're gonna have to take quick heats from now on, get it onto the punty, and get it finished up. All right, well, that was fun. Thanks again to the team. Let's give these guys a big round of applause for being a great team. And couldn't do it without you guys. Thanks so much. And I'm going to just click back to the slides really quick, leave you guys with a few thoughts. If we could just move back to that PowerPoint presentation really quickly here at the end. Again, thanks everybody at home for watching the live stream. And again, check out all the content on cmog.org. This is an hourglass I designed. So typically the hourglass is positioned in a linear fashion. So either straight up and down to measure time or on its side to stop the clock. But we know that time isn't linear or absolute, but it's relative. And so this device becomes an object where the viewer can manipulate the axis, and it becomes a device to contemplate the idea of time rather than try and accurately measure it. I think it's a really human impulse to measure something you don't fully understand. And we can measure time really well, but to me, that's like inventing a metronome without really understanding what music is. So this sort of device is that mental driver I discussed in the beginning, where the function is really to get you to think. And here we are. This is what we made today. This is the new series. These are called the Bigly vases. And Bigly is one of those words where when you hear it the first time, you're not sure if it's a real word or not. And it turns out it is a real word. It's just really difficult to use it well in a sentence. And so these forms kind of skate that line. I think when you see these forms at first, you're not sure if they're completely naive or if they've been highly considered. And I like that ambiguity. And I want to thank everyone again for joining us here tonight. Check me out online and follow me on Instagram. And thanks again for the Corning Museum of Glass for having me tonight. Thanks so much. Good night. Bye-bye.